Welcome to ITOpsTalk, all things hybrid. I am Sonia Cuff, Senior Cloud Advocate, and with me is Oren Thomas. Say hello, Oren. Hello and welcome to ITOpsTalks, all things hybrid. My name is Sonia Cuff. I'm a Senior Cloud Advocate at Microsoft, and with me is my colleague Oren. Say hi, Oren.
G'day, Sonia. My name's Oren Thomas. I am a Principal Cloud Advocate at Microsoft, and today we have this absolutely amazing event, ITOpsTalk Hybrid.
Absolutely. So I'm up here in Brisbane and Oren's down in Melbourne. Today, we're really pleased to be able to bring you this coverage live. Now, our American colleagues kicked it off in the start of their morning in Pacific Standard Time, but we managed to snag some time to come and speak to the people who are awake in our APAC time zones. You can see we have a global team. So as I mentioned, myself and Oren are based here in Australia. We've got our manager, Rick Gores, in America. Anthony is one of our Canadians. He focuses on mainly IoT things. And Pierre is also one of our Canadians as well. Pierre's the guy that you want to talk to about Azure Migrate and those kind of related things. Pumla is in America as well. Pumla's got an amazing virtualization background. And Sarah is in Scotland. She used to work for another role at Microsoft and came and joined us. She's got a very strong IT pro background. And of course, Thomas is in Switzerland, and he is our resident Azure Stack expert and loves to talk about all things Azure Stack. Together, we are the ITOpsTalk team, and we've been working for the past couple of months to bring together some deep dive technical content for you.
We have, and just remember to ask Thomas why he hasn't bought his fiancée a cat at this point in time. So what we need to cover now is one of those little technical bits and pieces. So we're offering the ability for you to actually contribute to this event, be it through our Discord server, be it through asking questions on platforms such as YouTube or Pubble or what have you. Now, because we're getting you to interact, what we'd like you to do is follow just a few basic rules. And these are things such as be aware of others, don't be impatient, be welcoming and respectful, be open to all questions and viewpoints, be understanding of people's differences, and be kind and considerate to others. So that's our code of conduct, and everything will go much more awesome if you follow it.
Absolutely. Look, I think in Australian we sum that up as don't be an idiot, but it's nice to have some formal rules from engagement. People expect this kind of thing at an in-person event nowadays, and it just keeps everybody on the same page with the rules as we engage and interact in those channels. Thanks for that, Oren. Okay, so what have we got to look forward to? We've got communities that are joining us. So we have people who have decided to do watch parties. Now, watch parties are a new thing to me. I haven't done many of them, but the interesting thing about the format, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is the fact that the content is sitting there as a recording for you to watch when it suits you. You can literally choose your own agenda and plan to watch the content when it suits you to watch it. Now, that can be a little lonely, and we know that we're really missing the in-person interaction of being able to turn to the person next to you in the session and ask them what they thought about what you're watching. So we have community leaders around the world that are putting on watch parties. Feel free, if you find some content that you like, to go ahead also and start up your own watch party to connect with other people to watch this pre-recorded content at the same time so that you can have this discussion about what you're watching.
The other thing we've got running is a Cloud Skills Challenge. Now, what a Cloud Skills Challenge is we've got this platform called Microsoft Learn. And in Learn, we have modules that basically provide information, videos, and ask you actually knowledge check questions. And we've put together a collection of about 41 modules. And what we're asking you to do is to go through and to complete those modules. Some of you might have actually completed them. And the modules are generally topic around what we're discussing at this particular event. Now, there's some people that have already completed this challenge, and it's more about the learning than the prizes, but some of the prizes involve some one-on-one time with some principal program manager in the Azure Stack hybrid and Windows Server space. But the other prizes that we've got, and we've still got 5 of them left, is if you want a career counseling session or just a career sync to talk about your career and where you want to go, you can actually have a discussion with one of us who is on the ASOPS team, and you can choose whoever you want, and have a discussion about sort of where your career is and where it's going. So follow that link and use the QR code, or just if you go to ITOpsTalk.com, there will be a blog post that will explain how you get involved in the challenge and how you complete the challenge.
Yeah, that Cloud Skills Challenge is a great incentive for learning about some of these hybrid topics. And it's great to see that Windows Server hybrid content up and available now on Microsoft Learn, bridging that knowledge of all the things that we used to do with and still do with our on-premises Windows servers and how they interact with our Azure Cloud. And of course, that's the big focus of this event being a hybrid event. When we sat down as a team to kind of come up with what we thought the theme should be for this first attempt at the event, hybrid was really front of mind because we understand that it's where a lot of our customers are. We have customers who have on-prem environments and are starting to use cloud capabilities, but aren't in a position and may never ever be in a position to totally move to a cloud-only space.
One of the things that we want to reinforce is that you don't have to pick up everything and move to the cloud. And that with hybrid, we're really talking to that audience that has a lot of resources on-prem and probably will continue to have a lot of resources on-prem for the foreseeable future. But just because you're going to have stuff on-prem doesn't mean that you can't make that more awesome, make that more wonderful, make it better. So one of the things that we've got in a lot of these sessions is a discussion of the technology that exists within Azure, about things like Azure File Sync, Azure Software Update, that actually enhance your on-prem experience by sort of providing a management plane in the cloud. And we've got a session, one of the sessions on demand is Sonia and I talking to Jeff Woolsey about that particular set of topics. Sonia, what else do we have that's really interesting in that space?
Yeah, so on that, one of my favorite sessions was the Windows authentication internals in a hybrid world, and how the login process of logging into your Windows client and putting in your password has evolved over time, and how it all works in the background now that you are connecting to an on-prem domain and cloud resources as well. So we didn't just talk about how it works now. There was a bit of a step back in time as to how the process used to be and how it sort of evolved and changed as we've had to tackle this new environment.
Now, you can interact with us on chat as the keynote plays. So if you go to the appropriate platforms, which you'll see again through ITOpsTalk, you can go in and you can interact with all members of the team if you've got any questions. The other thing is, as you watch the keynote, look at what Mark's saying, and then if you've got a question for Mark, well, ask it, because he's going to be on a bit later and he's going to actually be answering your questions as they come up.
Yeah, absolutely. So next steps coming up, we do have a bit of a talk by Mark Russinovich, our CTO of Azure. And as Oren said, whether you're watching this on Learn TV or on YouTube or any of the other platforms that we're streaming it to, jump into the chat, ask your questions. If they don't get answered in that presentation, we'll certainly hold them over for the live Q&A, because we do actually have Mark joining us. Now, it's pretty special for our Australian time zone. I know it's getting fairly late in the night US time. So yeah, the opportunity to actually get those questions answered now live is really exciting for us. So we're very close to seeing that session come through of Mark in his presentation. I know that he has a lot of things to talk about in terms of cloud technologies and how they work in our hybrid environments.
Okay, so we're just about to throw to Mark, and with Mark covering all of the technologies that exist for hybrid and the stuff that's coming up, and you will learn a lot more about that in the next session.
Let's go.
Hi, welcome to Microsoft Azure Hybrid Solutions. My name is Mark Russinovich. I'm Chief Technology Officer and Technical Fellow for Microsoft Azure. So to understand Azure's hybrid solutions, it's important to understand how that fits in the overall context of Azure. And you might think of Azure as cloud and hyperscale public cloud regions. Of course, that is where Azure started, and that is where you're going to get the most value and scalability. However, Azure spans this entire spectrum that you see here, all the way down to tiny devices that fit in things like coffee machines that are integrated with Azure, and many points in between. We have Azure Edge Zones, for example, and then for your deploying Azure services and capabilities in your own data center, we've got Azure Private Edge Zones, and we also have Azure Stack Hub. Azure Stack Hub being a fully cloud consistent version of Azure that can even run disconnected from the public cloud in as small as 4 hyperconverged servers in your own data center. It also includes Azure Stack HCI, Azure Stack Hyperconverged Infrastructure, which also runs in your own hardware, in your own data centers. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then finally, it includes Azure IoT devices, which are Azure IoT SDKs that can be installed in Raspberry Pis and other IoT class devices that integrate up into Azure's IoT solutions and allow you to stream data, send control messages, and deploy applications onto those class of devices. When we talk about Azure's hybrid solutions, there's a whole spectrum of them beyond just the hardware integrations that I've talked about. For example, at the bottom, Microsoft's always been focused on integrating your own on-premises capabilities with Azure and either bringing value from Azure down to your on-premises data centers or integrating your on-premises data centers and applications with Azure itself. So we've got support for management that I'll talk more about in a little bit later. We've got support for security and identity. For example, Azure Active Directory has ways for you to do single sign-on from your own on-premises Active Directory deployment into cloud services, whether they're Azure's cloud services, Microsoft's in general, or even third-party SaaS and PaaS offerings. Security hybrid has been a focus of ours from the start. So Azure Security Center lets you deploy Azure security agents on your own infrastructure and then get deep insights out of that in Azure's and also policy applications and compliance reports in Azure Security Center. We've also got support for hybrid application and data services. So SQL, for example, has support for backing up to public Azure. Windows Server supports backup to public Azure. We also have been a big focus on dev tools and DevOps, which are also focused not just on developing applications for Azure's public cloud, but being able to develop applications regardless of where they get deployed, including your own data center. There's a set of offerings that are specific to Azure and integrations with Azure. And I already talked a little bit about Azure Stack with Azure Stack Hub and Azure Stack HCI. We also have made a big investment in a relatively new offering we announced about a year ago called Azure Arc. What Azure Arc does is recognize that you've got on-premises applications and infrastructure that you might want to bring Azure capabilities to. And those Azure capabilities include things like monitoring, management, including applying policies, role-based access control, and control plane operations, where you can leverage Azure's APIs and Azure's portal to directly interact with those on-premises resources. We have several initial offerings in the Azure Arc category, including Azure Arc for Server, where you can take servers and register them with Azure and get the ability to deploy extensions and agents into them, monitor them, role-based access control of access to them. Kubernetes support for Azure Arc, where you can register your on-premises Kubernetes clusters with Azure, and again, take advantage of all those capabilities. And Azure data, big data clusters, which are SQL, Postgres, that run on top of Kubernetes deployments on premises. These initial offerings are going to expand, but the idea here you can see is I've got an existing virtual machine. It's sitting here on premises. I'd like to bring Azure management and monitoring and security capabilities to that virtual machine, and that's what Azure Arc lets you do. And I'm going to focus in this presentation on highlighting some of the ways that Azure Arc lets you do that and some of the power that it brings. And then finally, the category of IoT is a big focus of ours. Intelligent cloud, intelligent edge, bringing machine learning out to the edge, dealing with scenarios where latency and bandwidth or data sovereignty might prevent you from putting a workload or putting that data up in the public cloud. It has to be close to the endpoint, sitting in the environment, and so that is a focus of our IoT solutions. Like I said, I'm going to focus here on Azure Stack HCI and Azure Arc. And the reason that I'm focusing here is because these are very easy ways for you as an enterprise operator to be able to take advantage of Azure with minimal effort and take it and leverage its capabilities in place. So it's the kind of the easiest way. That one of the ways to adopt the cloud is, of course, to do cloud migrations, lift and shift your applications, modernize your applications, deploy them to the cloud. Those are typically longer journeys requiring deep analysis of your workloads and planning for architectures and then planning for those movements. In the case of Azure Stack HCI, it is kind of easy to adopt, very quickly to adopt capabilities from the public cloud. So Azure Stack HCI, you can see in here, is on premises. So you bring your own server hardware, your own hyperconverged servers from the OEMs that you traditionally will work with, and it provides a number of capabilities to that infrastructure. It includes things like security monitoring. It includes the ability for you to do backups of those virtual machines to the public cloud and take advantage of that cheap, highly reliable, highly available public cloud storage to back up your own on-premises infrastructure. It includes support for update management and orchestration of updates across that infrastructure. And it also includes the ability for you to do monitoring, and that monitoring is for health analytics monitoring as well as for security monitoring of that infrastructure. All of that is what Azure Stack HCI brings to the table by leveraging capabilities in public Azure. So Azure Stack HCI may be something you're familiar with because you've been following our data center evolution for several years, or it might be something new to you. And regardless, you might be wondering, how does that relate to our Windows Server strategy? So what I'm going to do is explain how they're similar and how their focus is a little bit different. So first, we're investing heavily in both of them. Azure Stack HCI is our focus of relatively new. We've got a roadmap of awesome new releases. Windows Server is something we've been working on for decades, and we continue to evolve and mature it and enhance it with new cloud-native capabilities. But the way that they're different now is Azure Stack HCI is really focused on being a great virtualization host or a great virtualization platform, whereas Windows Server is focused on being an awesome guest, meaning where you're going to be actually running your workload, leveraging the capabilities of Windows Server as a runtime, either in a virtual machine or on top of a bare metal server. And that means that Azure Stack HCI is the future of Hyper-V virtualization and our software-defined data center roadmap. So things like software-defined networking and software-defined storage and bringing that to your own on-premises infrastructure, that is Azure Stack HCI. Whereas Windows Server is going to continue to evolve and fulfill its capabilities of delivering great Windows Server roles support, including things for like DNS, DHCP, Active Directory, and file services and web serving. So whereas Azure Stack HCI is a great virtualization host aimed at supporting any type of virtual machine operating system, any type of guest, whether it's Windows Server or any of the flavors of Linux that it's supported. Windows Server, of course, is going to be a great platform for running Windows apps as well on top of it, like SQL Server. So you can think of one as virtual machines, the other one is Windows Server apps and roles. And this is where they're a little bit similar and also a little bit different, because Azure Stack HCI is designed to run on your own infrastructure in your own data centers. You can think of Azure Stack HCI as being the on-premises implementation for your own enterprise of infrastructure, whereas in public Azure, we've got a kind of a version of Azure Stack HCI with software-defined data centers running in public Azure data centers. Windows Server, though, is designed to run anywhere, whether it's in your own hardware, on Azure Stack HCI and bare metal servers in your own data centers, in public Azure, or in other clouds as well. Now, if we take a look at the Azure Stack HCI architecture, you can see at the bottom we've got a hardware ecosystem, and these are going to be all of the OEMs that you've purchased your hardware through, supported by Azure Stack HCI. On top of that, we've got the Azure Stack HCI operating system, which is a distributed operating system that supports software-defined data center like I talked about, and on a per node or per server basis, that's where you're going to see Hyper-V at the foundation of it. On top of that, you've got your Windows or Linux virtual machines, as well as support for AKS on Azure Stack HCI. And this is our bringing compatible Azure Kubernetes service that we've got in Azure down to your own infrastructure, so you can run your Kubernetes workloads on top of Azure Stack HCI with integrations and optimization with Azure Stack HCI's infrastructure. Then on top of that layer, you're going to have your virtual apps that run in virtual machines. You're going to have cloud native apps that run on top of Kubernetes. And you're also going to have Arc-enabled data services, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later. But Arc-enabled data services, again, SQL and Postgres, those are going to be running on top of Kubernetes, whether it's AKS on Azure Stack HCI or other Kubernetes distributions. And then finally on top, we've got your runtimes and other applications that you're going to build on top of this foundational layer. You can see over on the right side of the architecture diagram that we have Azure Arc, and I already talked about Arc-enabled data services. I also, going back, talked about how Azure Arc can be enabled on your virtual machines. So this is where you would register those virtual machines, Windows or Linux virtual machines, with Azure Arc, and then get Arc management, monitoring, and security capabilities applied to them. But Azure Arc also deeply integrates with Azure Stack HCI itself. And to demonstrate that, why don't we go take a look at how we can register a file share in Azure Stack HCI and have that be managed and accessible through Azure. So here you can see my dashboard in Windows Admin Center, and what I'm taking a look at here is the Azure connection, the status of my servers, and the status of my drives. What I'm going to do to demonstrate some of the capabilities of Windows Admin Center on top of Azure Stack HCI is go create a new file share and show you just how easy it is to create a very resilient file share, all from this UX, and to demonstrate that kind of resiliency you get right out of the Azure Stack HCI infrastructure. So first, let's go create a volume. I call this volume here demo volume, and we want it to be a two-way mirror so that it can be highly resilient in the face of any particular server failure. We're going to create that volume as a virtual size of 20 gigabytes, and you can see that that's the amount of space we actually require is double that because it is a mirror. And then we create. And this is being created right on top of that Azure Stack HCI storage pool that we've registered. Like I mentioned, we want to be able to share out that volume to our enterprise users. And so the next thing we're going to do is to go create a file share on top of it. And here you can see that we're going to select the volume that I just created, call this demo share, and create that share. Skip through the defaults here and create it. And you can see here we've got it created, so we can immediately go open that share now. And you can see it's empty. Go back to Windows Admin Center. You can also explore the share from there. And this is actually all of the Azure Stack HCI's shares or volumes. And here you can see I've clicked open the demo volume I created and access the demo share that's registered on that top volume. I'm going to upload some files directly in Windows Admin Center to that share on that volume. and then we've finished the upload, I can go back into Explorer on that share and double click that, and you can see we've got a bunch of client records inside a zip file now. Now I've just uploaded this, and the active node on that mirror is node 1. So to demonstrate the resiliency that I've just gotten out of the box here, I'm going to shut down node 1 on this Azure Stack HCI infrastructure. Shut it down, and we go back into Explorer and Windows Admin Center, and you can see that here we are on node 2, which is still up and active. If I go to the file share there, we're going to find that our files on that share were synced. And so even though, obviously, despite the fact that we've had a major failure here of a node, because that was a two-way mirror on top of Azure Stack HCI, completely transparent to those end users that were interacting with the share. So that's a quick look at Azure Stack HCI and some of the capabilities you get out of Azure Stack HCI managing your infrastructure and presenting capabilities and services on top of it, including support for creating highly resilient volumes and file shares on top of those volumes. Now let's talk about how to leverage the power of Azure on top of your Azure Stack HCI infrastructure. And that's where we get back into Azure Arc. And I've talked about Azure Arc for servers, registering your virtual machines or your bare metal servers with Azure, which allows you to access them through the Azure portal, through the Azure CLI, and get those benefits of policy, security, and monitoring on top of them. Azure Arc for Kubernetes, rather, which is registering your Kubernetes clusters. And finally, Azure Data Services on Azure Arc, where you can take your big data clusters and run them on premises on your own infrastructure. So here's a deeper look at the architecture of Azure Arc. At the bottom, you've got resource-specific tools, like your Kubernetes native tools, your server admin tools, your Git repo, your other tools that are going to be leveraging in your on-premises infrastructure, regardless of whether you connect them up to Azure Arc or not. At the very top, you've got management experiences and management services that apply to Azure Arc. Like I mentioned, monitoring, role-based access control, insights into the security policies that you've got, and insights into the monitoring that is being generated by what's called Azure Resource Manager, which is the universal control plane to Azure. And let me stop here for a second and talk a little bit about Azure Resource Manager, because understanding Azure Resource Manager, I think, will really drive home a deeper understanding of Azure Arc. ARM, Azure Resource Manager, is the universal control plane for all of Azure. All of Azure's infrastructure and platform as a service offerings plug in to ARM for their control planes. What that means is that ARM is effectively the front door for Azure. And as the front door, it can provide uniform capabilities across all of these services. Those uniform capabilities are the ones I've been talking about. Role-based access control. So there's a common way to apply role-based access control across all of Azure services because they all plug into ARM. Similarly, for monitoring on that control plane, you get that right out of Azure Resource Manager because all of its control plane operations for all Azure services go through ARM. ARM logs all that to an activity log that you can then go look at for security insights and for business and service health insights. And then policy is something else you can apply, and organization of your inventory. So grouping collections of resources that are instantiated through Azure ARM is possible through the use of Azure Policy and Azure Management Groups, where you can attach policy to groups of resources that have similar purpose and require similar compliance and security rules. And governance and compliance, of course, is a key part of that. Now, when you talk about Azure Arc for virtual and physical servers, that means installing an Azure Arc agent inside that virtual server that is, or physical server that's registered with ARM through the Arc RP or resource provider. And now what that does is light up those servers into ARM, and you get those ARM capabilities. Similarly, for Kubernetes clusters, once you register that Kubernetes cluster after you install the Arc agent for Kubernetes in that cluster, register it with Azure Arc. At that point, it shows up now as a Kubernetes cluster through Azure Arc and Azure's portal and Azure's command lines, and now it's part of Azure's control plane. And the same thing happens for Azure Arc Data Manager, which registers your SQL or your PostgreSDB clusters with Azure Arc, again giving you those same capabilities up into Azure's portal. And you can see where this is going. Really, the Azure Arc agent, by registering a resource with Azure ARM and providing that control plane plugin, you automatically get all of the capabilities, all of the richness, support for templates, support for governance, support for security insights on top of Azure Security Center, on top of Azure Sentinel, which I'll talk about a little bit later, just by virtue of plugging in. So no easier way to get all of these capabilities and consistency with everything else you're doing in Azure by registering your resources with Azure Arc. So let's take a look at Azure Arc in action on top of Azure Stack HCI infrastructure. So here I'm back in Windows Admin Center. Now this time, instead of looking at volumes, I'm going to take a look at virtual machines. And so here we're going to go to the virtual machines menu. And you can see that I've got a couple of them. And I've got one here in the stop state, this Windows Server 2019 virtual machine. Let's start that virtual machine by powering it on. And then we're going to connect to it. And you're going to see that this is a fresh virtual machine. We've got the Server Manager dashboard that comes up by default on this brand new clean image. Now, when I go to Microsoft Azure's portal, you can see I just did a refresh. And because we had that Arc agent installed and registered that virtual machine with Azure, it shows right up here in the Azure portal. And it shows right up here with a bunch of different capabilities offered up to me, like security, monitoring, policies, those things I've been talking about, for me to readily access right here. One of the things I mentioned, which is a really powerful capability that is consistent with public Azure, is the ability to install agents into those virtual machines. And what I'm doing here is installing the Microsoft Log Analytics agent, which is Microsoft's monitoring agent, which we install into public Azure virtual machines, here onto my on-premises virtual machine. And you can see I've registered it with my Log Analytics workspace. And what that means is that now I'm going to start getting logs automatically from that Windows Server machine, the event logs, sent up into Azure for me to be able to look at. You can also see that I'm able to connect and manage that virtual machine right here from the Azure portal. So I'm connecting through RDP back to my on-premises infrastructure into that virtual machine. And when I do Control-Alt-Delete and pull up Task Manager, you can see that I've installed that monitor agent, and it in fact is already in there in that virtual machine and running, and now collecting data that's being sent up to Azure for us to be able to mine in ways for security analytics as well as health for that virtual machine. So we've just seen me create a volume on top of Azure Stack HCI, look at a virtual machine on Azure Stack HCI, install the Azure Arc agent so that I could see it up in the Azure portal and start managing it and getting the capabilities through ARM that I talked about. We actually used one of the really cool capabilities for Azure Arc for servers, which is installing extensions into it. And the extension I installed into that virtual machine was the Azure monitoring agent, the same agent we apply everywhere in Azure. Now that I've done that, I've got this foundation on which I can start to provide really cool value-added services on top and capabilities on top of that. And one of them is security insights. I've already talked about Azure Security Center, and one of the things that we get right off the bat when we've registered one of those servers with Arc is the ability for that server to show up in Azure Security Center and for me to be able to see, is that server patched? What kind of vulnerabilities are exposed on that server? But one of the other things I get now with the log agent in there is the ability to do deep security analytics on top of what's coming out of that virtual machine, in the same way that I would do across my entire Azure portfolio. And that is through a service that we've got called Azure Sentinel, which you can think of as next-gen XDR or a SIM in the cloud, SIM as a service, and it's really taken off because of its incredibly powerful capabilities and ability to join lots of different data sources together so that you don't have islands of security information. You've got basically a lake of security information. And that is really important when it comes to security, because so many times a security threat isn't isolated to a particular resource, but actually spans resources. If we see threat actors doing lateral movements, and what they're doing on a virtual machine relates to what they've done on your network, what they've done in your identity system. And with all of these data sources being aggregatable into Azure Sentinel, now you can get insights and visibility across all of those different areas where the threat actor's acting. This slide takes you a little bit deeper into the architecture for Azure Sentinel. And you can see, like I said, all of these different data sources. Your on-premises SIM can pump data right into Azure Sentinel. We've got Microsoft Threat Intelligence, which we're providing our own information into Azure Sentinel, and I'll talk about how we use that in a second. You can get data from other public clouds and pump that into Azure Sentinel. All of these different data sources, because it's so extensible, really data can come from anywhere. And of course, we've got built-in connectors for existing Azure resources. Azure Active Directory, Azure ARM activity logs, all can be dumped into Azure Sentinel. And at that point, with log analytics, being able to, for you to be able to do your own queries across that entire data set of security signals, be able to say, where have I seen logins from this particular user across which assets and at what times? To having analytics rules, heuristics, or even machine learning algorithms surface things up as incidents. So where anomalies here and there are low fidelity signals, having intelligence combine these things together and surface things up as an incident where we have a high fidelity probability that we've got a threat actor working across those resources that Sentinel has access and visibility into. It also has supports for Jupyter notebooks. And so this is something that is becoming more popular for security analysts, is to be able to sit with a Jupyter notebook and run Python commands atop that database of security signals to be able to ad hoc get insights and even come up with workbooks and solutions which include automation, where you can have direct automated responses to particular kinds of activity. So once you've done an analytics on a particular threat, for example, and you see that a threat actor is operating in a particular way, and you have a mitigation in place, a mitigation which requires a number of steps and operations on your infrastructure, at that point you can automate that with the workbook and have that automatically run. Now, when that incident fires, the mitigation kicks into place. Or alerts go out to security operators. And then all of this, of course, relates to the ability to hunt. So one of the things that Azure Sentinel also does is present that security information up in a graphical form that allows you to see the relationship between different objects that have events being emitted for them, and also track security incidents and those anomalies and understand the incidents from a graph perspective that even spans resources across different assets. So to see Azure Sentinel in action and the kind of value that it can provide on top of the layers that I've been building up here, Azure Stack HCI, next Azure Arc, let's go take a look at Sentinel looking at our virtual machine. So here we are back in Windows Admin Center, and you can see here that when I take a look at the servers, we've got two servers. These are Node 1 and Node 2 in our Azure Stack HCI cluster. And when I take a look, you can see that we've got them registered with Azure and Log Analytics agent injected into them, pumping data into our Azure Sentinel workspace here. And you can see now that I've got that data flowing, that we can see events and alerts over time. You can see that I did have an alert because I was doing some testing on this. And we've got a map down at the bottom, which if there'd been a recent alert, we would have seen exactly where in the US, based off of IP address location, that alert came from. I mentioned the ability to plug in lots of different data sources into Azure Sentinel. You can see here the list of connectors that you could register. And I'm registering Azure Activity Log, which is the ARM logs, so that they start flowing into my Azure Sentinel workspace. And so I'm doing that connection right here. And that is an example of a first-party integration for Azure Sentinel. But one of the value propositions of Sentinel is it's not just Azure, it's also Microsoft services as well as many third-party services. As SIMs, appliances, you see Windows Firewall there, you can see syslog there, you can see lots of different vendors have their offerings integrated with Azure Sentinel through these connectors. And so we can have, like I said, a security lake, a security data lake with Azure Sentinel. Now to show you the integration with our on-premises Azure Stack HCI deployment here that I've got Arc enabled, I'm going to, after doing much work to force Windows to let me do this because Windows Defender is pretty good at detecting Mimikatz, installing Mimikatz on this server. Mimikatz is a notorious hacker tool for dumping credentials out of the local security authority, the local credential database on a Windows Server system, which allows an attacker to get the credential and then to perform lateral movements across your network. So a very dangerous tool if it's allowed to execute, and one that you certainly, if it executes or even attempts to execute on one of your servers, you're going to want to know. And you can see here, because we integrated with Azure Sentinel and Log Analytics, we immediately got an alert, a high priority alert with a high fidelity signal, which is actually an incident based off of 4 discrete events that are Mimikatz running on that. And you can see that we have this as an unresolved event. You can see that it's high severity. We can change classification of this for future reference and executions of the same incident. We also can set bookmarks on this. We can track the entities, and we can set up workbooks in response. So for example, we could have a script that goes in, does a mitigation, like deletes Mimikatz, or performs some other mitigation, like restores Windows Defender if it's been disabled on that server, automatically execute. So you've seen here in just a short time, I took an Azure Stack HCI cluster. I was able to show you how Azure Stack HCI lets you manage that infrastructure very easily and create highly available, highly reliable services on top of the software-defined data center technologies that are part of Azure Stack HCI. Then I showed you how to Arc enable your infrastructure and how once you've Arc enabled it, a lot of other capabilities can come on top of it, including one of the key ones, which is security insights through Azure Sentinel. Again, very easy, low-touch ways for you to start taking advantage of Microsoft's and Azure's hybrid capabilities for your on-premises infrastructure, right where you are, without having to go perform complex architecture migration plans, without having to worry about where your data is, but immediately getting value out of those kinds of integrations. And so that just gives you a flavor for what we hope to share with you at this Hybrid IT Ops event. And you can see a bunch of the other sessions that we've got here that go deeper into the things that I've been talking about, as well as talk about other aspects of our Azure hybrid offerings that I didn't have an opportunity to share with you. But again, wanted to get you excited about what you've got available to you very quickly and easily so that you can become a hero adopting cloud technologies for helping you get your jobs done in your own on-premises data centers. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoy the event.
Why are you laughing?
Oh, it was a good time. I love listening to Mark. I could listen to him all day long, basically. Talk about virtually anything. It's going to be an interesting topic. What'd you think of it, man?
Oh, I waited in the lines at the events, right? So I waited in the lines at Ignite just to see his presentations. So awesome that he's taking the opportunity to run us through, a hybrid scenario, right? Usually we hear the advancements of cloud, and I love the fact that, we're touching on-premises implementations, how they can leverage cloud, how, organizations can increase their security posture. Did you catch the IoT call out there?
Well, yeah, I figured you would catch the IoT one because obviously that is one of the smallest pieces of Azure that you can go off and deploy instead of hybrid environments, though, because you do have a good reputation of covering off some of the IoT space. So I'll give you credit for that.
Thank you. You know what else is small?
What's that?
That All Blacks jersey that you were supposed to wear during this segment, and it couldn't fit. So, but hey. let's be serious for a second here. So okay. IoT, and this is why I'm so excited about this. I've been saying for the longest time that IoT is of the importance of IT professionals because it is the new plane of on-premises hardware that you have to take into consideration. What I love about Mark's presentation is it holistically takes into consideration that IoT deployment as if it was a server, as if it was, a piece of hardware other than a small device that's just capturing a specific instance. And it's ensuring that that information is not being, stolen, and it's ensuring that that information or that device itself is not being hacked, right? And the detection is all there. I love that that's now inclusive, and it's something where, we've heard this before. IT professionals are challenged in the fact that, is there a, connection with them with IoT, or should it just be left up to the developers? That's actually probably a good question to ask Mark.
You know what? He's coming up just shortly here. In case you're wondering, you're now joining the broadcast that we're doing of the live webcast delivery of the keynote segment. Mark is going to be joining us here momentarily. My name is Rick Claus. In case you haven't met me before, I have the fortunate good graces of being able to lead this team of folks that put this event together for us here. Anthony's joining me from the Great White North in Canada. He's snowed in his basement and cannot actually get out to be able to go off and get any food. So he's surviving strictly on Cheetos and French fries, I do believe, or something like that.
The sled dogs are asleep, so
sled dogs are asleep. That's the important part. Again, thank you for joining us to be able to hang out here in the APAC region. So for me, one of the cool things that I heard Mark talk about, and I am going to be asking him about this, is obviously the advent of the differences between Azure Stack HCI and Azure and Windows Server, because they started off as one kind of place and they kind of spread it out into two different areas. And so I'm going to be looking forward to asking some more questions around the evolution into that kind of state for where they are. And again, if you haven't had the opportunity as of yet, you got some questions that are sitting there bouncing around inside your head. In the chat area of the particular streaming service that you happen to be watching right now, be it on Learn TV or on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, or whatever those types of streaming services happen to be, feel free to go ahead and to pick and choose and type us in a question, and we will get there momentarily to go off and talk with Mark.
You know what? The Azure Arc piece was also very interesting. It's something I got to dive into a little bit more. And the fact that you have this stickiness that can connect into your on-premises implementation, your in-cloud implementation, and have that ability to extract out information in terms of how your architecture is running, and to provide you with the guidance in terms of how do you move forward, how do you spread out resources, even from a perspective of if you have specific ISO standards that you have to adhere to, and you have to ensure that specific data resides in specific places, that whole availability and that insight from Azure Arc is really powerful stuff. It's that single pane of glass. And I know we say that a lot, but it's something where it's interesting, the fact that you have this capability as opposed to all these third-party softwares that, which are great. And, in some specific requirements, they're of importance. But if you're doing it right out of the gate, out of the box, and you're doing your architecture from the foundation up, that Azure Arc offering is something that's solid, and it provides that seamless visibility to all that you have.
Yeah, I remember we started to announce the ideas of Arc almost 2 years ago at Microsoft Ignite, when we used to be allowed to actually go to in-person conferences and stuff like that. We refined it and highlighted it some more in the most recent version of Microsoft Ignite last fall in the Northern Hemisphere, back in September timeframe, with some new updates and new capabilities for what happens to be inside the Azure Arc space. And the way that he explained it was literally, it's like a framework of infrastructure that you can deploy to your on-premises machines, and then from there you're able to go in and bring in the different pieces of the Azure agents as required, and Azure extensions as required to be able to get full functionality down on your on-premises systems. And also, as you mentioned, send the data up to be able to go off and analyze at scale. Now, you do some security work as well. I know that you actually had a couple of interviews on the sessions that are coming up, and you can watch on demand now at aka.ms/ITOpsTalks. You were actually talking to, I believe she's a UK expat now living in New Zealand, Ms. Sarah Young, about a number of things with Azure Sentinel. Do you have any insights that you wanted to kind of give us some gleaming tips from what you heard from talking with Sarah?
Here's the thing. Sarah is awesome because she's passionate about security, and when she talks about it, it's not just feeds and speed. She's actually going through real world scenarios from her previous history in financial, where she was running security for financial firms back in Australia. What's great is, again, with Sentinel, the ability to have that seamless look at your existing offering on premises, in cloud, and full governance over both from a security perspective. The beauty here is, attackers don't care if your data resides on premises or in cloud. They're going to try every vector to try to get into your data. And Sarah really walks us through in terms of how are you using, log analytics from your on-premises implementations and your services from your cloud spec to understand where the threats could lie, where there's situations that may occur. It's incorporating artificial intelligence to learn the attack patterns and attack vectors that could occur from outside or even inside if there's that instance, and then using logic apps to remediate, either to provide a fix or to provide a notification in some respect, or even just to provide reporting. Even the tie-in with Azure Security Center as a 1-2 punch for the whole aspect of security, and that availability of getting the reporting, understanding what's going on, getting the reporting out in terms of what is the next steps for remediation, automating that through Sentinel. What I love is it all comes together in terms of the offering. So you can do Azure Security Center, and then you can add on Sentinel for that remediation. You can use Azure Arc to not only ingest the data from all your instances, but also on premises and in cloud, the ability to then take that information that's coming in from Azure Arc and feed it into Sentinel for that further analytics in terms of what an attack could occur. And that's definitely in 2 sessions. We have to break it out. It's an hour each with Sarah Young, which is awesome, of part 1 and part 2 in terms of securing your hybrid infrastructure. And do check that out, aka.ms/ITOpsTalks.
And do you remember the actual session codes?
So the Azure Security Center would be Ops 101,
yeah,
and the Sentinel would be Ops 103.
There you go. You got both of them. And in case you wanted to ask questions about those sessions, because they're not here during the individual keynote, we do have a Discord server that we talked about at the very beginning of this particular keynote live stream, which is available at aka.ms/ITOpsTalk-Discord. And in there, we've already seen a large number of conversations start to kick off and take place from people that saw the morning broadcast here in Universal Central Time of Pacific Northwest, headquarters of Microsoft, of course. And so all of those different sessions, people are already chatting and talking about the content and watching the content off of the different blog articles that we referenced, that you can then go in and take a look at and ask questions. It's great because I'm actually seeing the different speakers that recorded those different sessions jump in and answer questions. And sometimes even other attendees jump in and answer questions before the speakers can even get there to be able to go off and to interact with folks. So you can kind of think of it as our hallway conversation, if you will, for what's going on. We're just about to go off and start off another quick little fun experiment to try out in just a moment here. But before we do, I just wanted to call out as well another thing that we have going on that's possible. Warren talked about it, and Son talked about it at the very beginning, the Cloud Skills Challenge, specifically for the hybrid content that was just released on Microsoft Learn. This is where I am completely oblivious, because I'm going on almost no sleep right now, to understand what the AKA short link is for that one there. But we will capture that at the end of this particular live stream, where you can go off and test your skills and try out your capabilities against your peers and have some bragging rights. There are some prizes that are more experiential based. So basically, if you're in the top category of people that actually complete it in the amount of time that we've allocated, you get to have the possibility of having a conversation with Jeff Woolsey as an example, for being able to go off and have a one-on-one conversation with him, or even have a one-on-one conversation or a group conversation with one or more of the folks that are on my team here and putting together this event as it is. So next up, we got something, I don't even know how to say the word. Is this like how do you say this word anyway, buddy?
Well, here's the thing. We've been doing puzzles all week. So yeah. I thought, let's move it forward. Actually, Suzanne came up with this phenomenal idea. Let's continue on with the games, and we're going to play Kahoot. So for those of you that are watching, there's a bit of delay in terms of the restream of this game. But from your mobile device, if you can go to kahoot.it, and then you enter in this PIN number. And we're going to have a set of questions that you are going to battle against your friends and everybody here watching the live stream. So there's Rickster.cdn. So let's put the challenge forward. Who can beat Rick on this? Now, I'm expecting that Rick is going to win, just because,
Oh, because I saw the questions beforehand. So
that's true.
I can answer some earlier ones. We'll see.
Very cool. We have Snorlax playing.
Yeah, at least one other.
Well, let's see if we can grab one more.
We have a minimum requirement, minimum bar that we have to fill in here, my
minimum
friend
bar
Anthony.
of 3.
Okay, we'll see if we can get one more coming in. There we go.
There we go. We got a couple coming in.
Nice.
All right, shall we get started?
Yeah, I think we should. Let's get this off.
All right, for our first question for ITOpsTalks Hybrid. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Question number 1 is a multi-select. Azure now spans an entire spectrum of services. Which services does it include? This is a multi-selection question. Azure Sphere, Azure Stack Hub and HCI, Azure IoT devices, and Azure Edge and private edge zones.
Now, see, again, this is funny because we get to see them before anyone else does because there's a delay on YouTube and a delay on the Learn TV. So I have to answer them too, so I should probably get these right here. But I'm going to say, oh, you know what? These guys right here. I'm going to go this one and that one and that one. There we go. I want to say submit. There's my answer in there. So we got at least a couple people to answer, which is good.
Yeah.
That can be there. So this kind of trips some people up, I think. We shall see. Oh, look at that.
Right.
All of us answered.
Everybody answered.
Oh.
Wired Canuck. Number 1.
I'm at the end. That's not great.
I'm not going to mention who's watching this game show, but that's okay.
Okay. That's good.
Next up, question number 2.
Yep.
Which solution allows on-premises architecture to take advantage of Azure capabilities such as monitoring and management? Is it Azure Sphere, Azure Stack, Azure Arc, or Azure Active Directory?
See, now I'm scared about the person that's just joined us if he's actually joined in now too.
I don't think he's watching.
We'll see. Oh, look at that. 4
right, 1 wrong.
Yeah, I like it. The odds are looking good.
Still at the top.
What?
Still 4th. That's not good.
See? Oh, this might be a resume generating event right now if I'm not coming in at the top.
And that's why I'm the game show host. Let's continue on.
Yes, thanks.
True or false? Azure Stack, HCI, and Windows Server are the same offering. True or false?
Someone is quick on the draw.
I was going to say.
That is fast.
To be fair, there is a bit of a delay for those that are on the stream, so
yeah,
we will wait for everybody to answer.
That is true.
But you are 4th, and you do get the questions first. Just saying.
You as someone on my team, you're supposed to share the answers with me beforehand. There we go.
Oh, everybody got that one right. That is false.
Yeah.
Oh, Rickster's on fire, but he's still 4th. How does that work? That's interesting.
I like it.
Highest streak of 3 answers right.
Yeah.
Next question. Azure Arc for Kubernetes enables the ability to organize and govern across environments, enables the ability to run data services anywhere, offers at-scale app management, or none of the above.
See, now I'm confused because you would assume that we're talking Kubernetes. There'd also have to be some blockchain conversations going on too. And that the pointy-haired boss would make sure that we'd all have these incorporated into our new strategy for transformation.
I'm not going to go there because you called the boss pointy-haired. But,
no.
Just going to say, we got a couple right, couple wrong.
Yeah.
Let's see how we are on the scoreboard. Oh, we got Snorlax.
Finally have some movement going on there.
But you haven't moved, Rick.
I don't know what it is. It's conspiracy, I think.
All right, next up. Number 5 of 6. Azure Sentinel can manage your security posture for both on-prem and in-cloud. True or false?
We'll see. How fast can we get this one done? Coming in. Oh, couple.
2 wrong.
Oh,
Pierre,
no movement.
Producer Pierre from the AZ Update Show takes top place. That's awesome. You haven't moved.
He's supposed to be watching the control panels, is all I know.
All right. Last question. And Rick, if you don't get this one, I don't know. The color of Rick's hat is green, brown, tan, or beige?
Well, see, you didn't ask specifically which hat, because the original hat was a different color. There we go.
We got two that said brown. Yep, two that said brown, and four that said green. And let's check out the podium. In third place, Rickster CDN. So you did move up one. There you go. You're at least on the podium. There you go.
Moved up one slot.
Second place is Snorlax, and first place is, I'm guessing, Pierre Roman. Congratulations.
We'll have a conversation in our next one-on-one. Pierre, I'm watching you. Good stuff, man. Well,
that was fun.
It was fun. Thank you very much for helping us host that. And also, again, for a little bit of the recap, Mr. Anthony Bartello, otherwise known as @Wireless Life, signing off, because I do believe we have a connection from the secret underground layer of Mr. Mark Russinovich. He is joining us today, this evening, in Pacific Central Universal Time. Yes. Nice to see you, Mark. Hello.
Good to see you, Rick.
Good to see you too, my friend. Thank you very much for joining us.
Disappointed in you, but good to see you.
Well, you didn't see the first round earlier this morning, so you tuned in just for this one. And I did move progressively upward. I'm calling that a growth mindset.
Yeah. Did you get the green hat? Did you get the color of Rick's hat right?
I did, but it's tricky because I instinctively wanted to press the color green, and they make your brain think about it, right? Yeah. So that's the hard part for where that comes in for me. But the story behind the hat, in case you're wondering, I actually started with a brown hat. It's got a lifetime warranty. I took it back to the store because there were some problems with it many years after I got it back when I was a lot younger. And they had no longer made the brown hats anymore. So I switched to the green hat.
What's the point of a lifetime warranty?
Well, the hat itself is only the color. They decided no one was buying that color anymore. So they went with green instead. You
should have, gotten really upset.
I'm Canadian. I say sorry. When is something wrong? Well, can I please bring this back?
Apologize for getting the wrong color.
Probably, yes. Oh my goodness. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us, and again for putting together that keynote that you worked with us for this particular live stream they're doing here for this event for ITOpsTalks, all things hybrid. Now, I asked you this question in the morning. I actually liked it, so I'm going to ask it to you again for this one, just because this audience hasn't heard this one yet. But you talked about the scope and the range of Azure for being as small or as very, very large as you decide to implement for different facets and different workloads and different things. And I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about what you've seen as just like a really interesting small implementation use that's in a hybrid scenario, because that's obviously where it's targeted for. And if you could share a little bit about some of those pieces of that particular implementation that kind of were of interest to you.
Well, sure. Azure, along that spectrum, starting on the heavy end of that spectrum, Azure Stack Hub, standalone Azure that works in disconnected as well as connected environments. That makes it unique, bringing that cloud consistency down, also kind of full cloud consistency. So we've had lots of customers with lots of different use cases for that. One customer on an oil rig, for example, that has limited connectivity over satellite. They need to be able to operate oil rig operations in disconnected mode or almost totally disconnected mode. So that's one example use for Azure Stack Hub. Another one is Airbus Defense, which is using it for the factory floors, and those need to be disconnected because of the security sensitivity of those environments and the kinds of systems that they're building on them. So that's another example of Azure Stack Hub that has the disconnected aspect to it and bringing cloud consistency to an on-premises kind of an hybrid environment. Going down to the lighter side of things, Azure Stack Edge, that one, great example. We've had lots of interest from retail space. Very hybrid environments, stores, of course, where you have compute that needs to be local in the store for low latency, processing of data that's being collected in the stores, and then also feeding data out from a central server environment into the stores. So the kind of smart retail environments. In fact, we've got on campus here in the Executive Briefing Center, once we get that opened up again, there's an exhibit there that demonstrates Kroger's smart retail spaces that have been leveraging Azure Stack Edge. And the way that they've leveraged it, and besides the interest of having that local Azure kind of compute capability in the stores, is they want to keep data in the stores. They've got cameras around the stores to track customers as they go down the aisles so that they can offer them personalized offers on the shelves, on the smart shelves. That information, that data, the video that they collect, they want to keep in the stores to protect the privacy of those customers. So that's an example that we see repeated across the retail space. And then going down towards the small end of things, kind of more in IoT, but still connecting on-premises environments with the cloud, are the use of spheres in Starbucks coffee machines. So they place them in what's called Guardian mode to provide a layer of security protection on these devices that weren't designed with hostile cloud in mind. And by putting it Azure spheres there, they can control it securely, access to those devices, and that makes it possible for them to get telemetry off them, where they can monitor the quality of the coffee that's being brewed in the machines, as well as to download updated recipes to them.
The updated recipes, and probably also the alternate name spellings of different order numbers' names for who's coming in, to do some AI.
Actually, they need a cognitive API to help them with that, I think.
That's on V2 of that particular implementation to see how that one works. Now, you mentioned in your keynote earlier 3 different pieces to it. The first one being Azure Stack HCI and some of the stuff that was in there. And we had a really cool question from someone that was asking earlier on about the divergence, or how it separates out for going over to the HCI side and over to the Windows Server side. I was wondering if we could kind of grasp on that for just a minute, but on the Azure Stack HCI side, like, what would you do during a discussion with some of our customers, or some of the designing or envisioning stuff that you've done? When would you decide to go with convincing a customer that they're going to want to use Azure Stack Hub over top of using Azure Stack HCI, since it's one of our newer offerings? Just from a hybrid perspective, the main differences between the two. Some customers are asking about that one.
Well, Hub comes in appliance form factor, so it's hardware that is black box sealed, basically hardware that comes from the various OEM partners that we've got on the Azure Stack Hub program, and it comes with a full stack of cloud consistent services, starting with infrastructure services like VM services, Azure Storage, the Azure Web Apps, for example, Azure Functions, Azure Key Vault, and the Azure Resource Manager itself, and the portal. So it's basically Azure in a box. Now, Azure Stack HCI, that is infrastructure management for your own hardware. So it's kind of, I've got my own hardware and my own gear I'm bringing together. I'm installing Azure Stack HCI on top of it, and then having Azure Stack HCI manage that infrastructure for me, make kind of a consistent fabric of infrastructure across that, which includes the software-defined data center capabilities that are like the software-defined storage, software-defined networking. So a lot of that shared technology from public Azure, that gets into Azure Stack Hub, but really customized for on-premises heterogeneity and off-the-shelf hardware that is prevalent in those kinds of environments.
So it's not directly called out in the keynote that you have that we just saw now, but it requires an Azure subscription. You attach it up and you authenticate, and basically it from that point forward, you can manage that device using Windows Admin Center like you were doing inside of your examples and your demos earlier, or you can even look at it, from what I understand, inside the portal itself is simply another resource you can use. Now, that's definitely a direction of providing services to your VMs that happen to be running on top of that, as you mentioned, as one of the optimal workloads you'd be running on top of that particular hardware.
That's right. Yeah, that's basically what we see as that layer virtualization management at scale with the benefits of the modern infrastructure. And then you can see AKS now as a recent offering on top of that. So for cloud native development on top of that infrastructure.
And so thinking back to in the early stages when this kind of concept was being designed and discussed, at some point, I'm assuming in the engineering process, they have to come and kind of pitch to you as the CTO that this kind of makes sense. Can you think of what did you think when you heard of this kind of concept for like, hey, we're going to do this Azure Stack thing that's going to be a server cluster and attached up back into Azure? did you kind of go, well, we already have that with Azure Stack Hub? Like, talk to me here.
It made sense. The Azure Stack Hub, because it's an appliance form factor, because it's a full Azure, and it's hyper-converged infrastructure that we manage, doesn't fit all of the use cases out there. It also scales to a certain scale, whereas people are bringing their own on-premises infrastructure. They want it managed and given cloud capabilities, but it's hardware that they're bringing to bear, and they're potentially going to have it be operate at large scale. So when I was pitched this, if you take a look at kind of the evolution of Windows support for on-premises infrastructures at scale, like System Center Virtual Machine Manager, this is kind of the evolution of that with cloud technologies as part of it. So it made perfect sense to kind of modernize, allow customers to modernize the data center with Azure technologies and Azure inspired technologies on top of that base that was built out to support virtualization and the modernization of the data center that we saw going on after the 2000s and the rise of virtualization.
Now, along that vein, another area that you talked about obviously was a big integration and a section talking about Azure Arc. What was it like when they came to pitch that aspect to you, just out of curiosity, before we get into some more details on the technical side of things? Was it also one of those, like, it's common sense, like, why not kind of thing? Or was it more of a head scratcher?
No, that one was kind of finally we're ready to do this in my mind. So I was involved with the original creation of Azure Resource Manager, and as we were designing it, so Azure Resource Manager, for those people that maybe don't have the deeper view of what exactly it is a common unified control plane for Azure, and it's pluggable. So with resource providers that plug into it, basically you can expose any resource into Azure's control plane. And as long as it follows this contract that ARM expects, called the resource provider contract, once it's plugged in, you can deploy templates to it. It gets monitored, RBAC, policy, all of that goodness applies to it. The litmus test for have we really created a universal control plane that isn't tightly bound to Azure itself was, can you take a resource, potentially even from another cloud, and project it into Azure through a resource provider, so that you could potentially manage, for example, virtual machine deployment and management on another cloud through ARM. And so really it was designed to be able to take ARM's management capabilities anywhere or bring any resource to it, depending on the way you look at it. So it was one day I got scheduled a meeting with somebody from Azure marketing that worked in the hybrid space, and we sat in my conference room, and he's like, "We've got this idea. We want to bring on-premises resources like Kubernetes clusters and project them into ARM so that they can be managed through Azure's control plane with Azure CLI and Portal and get all of the benefits of ARM." And I was like, "Yes." And he's like, what do you think of this idea? Are you supportive?" And I'm like, "Yes, that's actually part of the big vision, and I think it's fantastic we're doing it." We started in Azure with custom resource providers, which I demonstrated at Ignite, which gives ISVs the ability to author their own resource providers to plug into ARM to represent their own resources. They're typically cloud resources that ISVs would project into ARM. Right. But this is an example of projecting on-premises resources into ARM.
Now, you've talked an awful lot about Azure Resource Manager, and obviously, as you mentioned, you're one of the architects that helped work and design and bring ARM to life inside of Azure. So being a guy that works with ARM on a regular basis with Azure templates and with ARM templates, I do have to ask you the next question, which is simply Bicep. Wow. Yeah. It's awesome. Can you talk to me a little bit about Bicep and how it's going to make, will it make that ARM templates are obsolete, or just the hand coding of them is obsolete?
Yeah, no, it's been really awesome to see the response to Bicep. It's been enthusiastic, and that's encouraged us to continue on to it. And just a little history for those people not familiar with what we're talking about here. Bicep is a domain-specific language, a DSL, for resource deployments on Azure. And the way that you might be thinking, well, you already have kind of something like that. It's called the ARM schema, JSON-based, and then that's how I author templates or write APIs to call into ARM. One of the things that became clear to us over years is customers got more sophisticated and wanted to do more sophisticated authoring of templates to orchestrate the deployment of their resources onto Azure, was that the JSON representation is very bulky. ARM schema is actually pretty verbose too. And so you get these templates that are hundreds of lines of JSON, very hard to understand, very hard to update. When you want to add a resource declaration to it, it's multiple lines of code, and people are typically cutting and pasting and not really sure what's going on. So it's very kind of, I'll drop this in and see if it works, rather than really fully understanding.
How many hours I've spent trying to find the misplaced semicolon or something like that's crazy.
Yeah, so exactly. And so we got lots of feedback from customers. Hey, make the authoring experience better. We want it. We love templates. We want to leverage them, but it's really tough. So we made steps like authoring VS Code plugins that offer IntelliSense for JSON templates. And customers found that to be a nice step up, but still some of those fundamental problems remain. So we started to explore, what if we implemented a ability to author ARM templates in a programming language? Like we took a look at Python. What if we did or PowerShell? What if you could author templates in PowerShell? And we floated this by customers, also looked at the pros and cons of these things, and came to the conclusion actually that they have some problems that were pretty fundamental. One is that those are imperative languages. They were designed for step 1, step 2, step 3, whereas ARM templates and the whole philosophy of ARM and code as config is declarative descriptions of your infrastructure. And that way, that gives you a lot of predictability, and it also gives the infrastructure a lot of opportunity to help you out with optimizing the way things are deployed and managing retries and understanding the resource provisioning lifecycle of all the resources and how they relate to each other. The other problem is that we thought that kind of taking and getting an inspired language off of that, like Python, well, customers might get confused. Developers approaching it would say it looks kind of like Python, but it doesn't behave exactly like Python, so it's kind of neither this nor that. So we decided instead to just, hey, let's approach this with a DSL specifically for this, and focus on simplicity. Getting rid of the verbosity, making it feel kind of like a programming language, even though it's declarative in nature. We enlisted Anders Heilsberg from TypeScript and C# to come over and consult on the development of this language, which gives us a lot of confidence that we're doing the right things when it comes to creating something new. And thus was born Bicep. So Bicep is a very natural way to feel like you're programming ARM, but still you're writing declarative code, and it's much more succinct than the ARM JSON. So now you can take Bicep and author your templates in Bicep, and then run the Bicep tool, which will convert them to ARM JSON, and then deploy that to Azure. So like I said, the response to this has been really enthusiastic, and we're getting close to having 100% compatibility in Bicep. We already have many customers that are using Bicep in production, and we'll be, once we get to the 100% point, being able to say, yeah, use this for production. And really we'll be looking at basically saying, or kind of the strategy will be, ARM JSON is assembly language. You will still be compatible. You can still author your code that way. But when it comes to authoring templates, Bicep is going to be by far the easiest way to do it.
It's going to be your default go-to as far as capabilities, for sure. Again, I'm looking forward to some more of that stuff. We have Ignite coming up in just under a month's time. Going to have some possible content in there, as well as some good stuff on Microsoft Learn on the Bicep area. So good stuff there. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this question. This came up in an earlier area because you are the CTO of Azure. Again, you can obviously default to a more PR answer if you have to, and you don't have to divulge all the internal details. But I'm curious, because we have an ever expanding number of regions inside of Azure that are now on Azure Public and also Azure Government and things like that, and national clouds. Like, what could you share as some of the decision criteria for where to select to have a new region appear? And once that potential decision and hurdles have been made, how long does it take to go off and to make an instance available make a region available inside of that designation? Broad, rough numbers, nothing held accountable. Not going to report this back to Brad Smith or anything like that. But what could you share just to gain some light? Because we're data center geeks and as well inside the operations space, and this is something at a scale that we can't even possibly imagine. Yeah, well,
there's a long checklist of how to find appropriate place for a region. But when it comes to countries and the prioritization of countries, there's a long checklist there from a business perspective. Like, how stable is the infrastructure? What's the stance of the national government with respect to Microsoft and Azure and public clouds and foreign business? And then it gets into the point where you pass those kind of basic checks on, is this a suitable place for eventually having cloud? Then it becomes just a prioritization exercise, which could be driven by either large anchor customer that says, we want Azure here for data sovereignty reasons, and we're willing to be the anchor customer that will commit to significant amounts of business and draw other customers along with us into the cloud. Or it's also just going after GDP of nations, basically knowing that there's enough business there and the country's modernized in their cloud adoption, so that we know that with strong signal that there will be customers for it. And you can see it's basically just kind of relentlessly marching through that list of top country GDPs and checking them off to bring cloud to them.
And then once the decision is made, is it the length of time for something to actually spin up and go directly tied to big long shopping lists off of Newegg suppliers or the Azure scale versions of those?
Yeah, that's when you get into it's variable because it depends on procuring land. I mean, there's significant land procurement. You've got to not just procure the land for the initial landing of an Azure region with availability zones for hero and hub regions, but you also need to make sure that you can expand, that we can have room for expansion, because we're planning ahead, initial tranche, and then we want to make sure that we don't run out of capacity in that country, and then it's like, we're going off and scrambling to try to find land. So there's land procurement, which has all sorts of constraints when it comes to data center. How close are you how's the grid? How close are you to network hubs and edges, and water supply, and road and infrastructure around it. So all of those considerations come into play on procuring land, and then setting up contracts to build up the data center, and then starting to pour the concrete. And so it varies. I think if you take a look at typical data center from starting to pour the concrete to it being turned on, it's typically 12 to 18 months.
Absolutely. That would be also, you could have answered that one with just, Rick, it depends.
Yeah.
Like when I was consulting Edge.
Yeah, I wanted to get a little more detail.
Well, I appreciate it. It makes it easier for the live stream to go that way. The dead air just doesn't work.
Yeah, and if it's a Natick data center, it's like 30 days from.
Very true. I'll be there and then dropped inside of your favorite lake as close as you go. Now, we have a couple of minutes left, and this one I wanted to ask, because I know that you traditionally are going to be doing a session at Microsoft Ignite about data center futures and stuff like that. Can you give us a glimpse or a quick little idea on maybe something, without revealing too much, about what you think about the future of supporting hybrid or the future of data centers in your session you might be talking about at Ignite?
What can I get? Well, I'm going to be doing a bicep demo, which is pretty exciting to show the current state of bicep that we'll have gotten to around the time of Ignite. As far as hybrid things, let's see, what am I doing in the hybrid? So there's by the way, I've got right now 11 demos, which is I think a tie for the most demos that I've done in a Ignite keynote.
That's awesome.
I don't think I've got any hybrid demos or any hybrid specific thing. I mean, like I said, a lot of what I'm talking about applies to hybrid because some of the things are ARM related.
That's good.
And I'll be giving an update on the Azure Stack Edge portfolio of devices, which I always do, is like, here's the latest and greatest spectrum of devices that we've got out. But it's going to be an action-packed, and I've got a bunch of new stuff that we've not talked about before coming.
Right. You don't need to talk about it now. Don't need to spill the beans. But you do have to promise me that we can once again do another interview during the Ignite stage, because that was a fun one last year.
Yeah,
back
definitely.
In the fall. And with that, I should say thank you very much again for the time you've taken to be able to come here and answer some questions. I appreciate it. Microsoft Ignite registration, in case the audience doesn't know, is open right now to go ahead and register. It is free to be able to attend, as was the last time. It's going to be action-packed format for what we're going through this year as well. go and reserve your spot. But with that, thank you very much, Mark, for taking time out of your evening. I very much appreciate it. And we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks for the opportunity to keynote, and good luck with the rest of the event.
You got it. Thank you.
Thanks.
We are going to bring back my good friends Sonia Cuff and Oren Thomas as well. They're still here from the land down under. It's now I can see sunshine coming through the back of your blinds there, Sonia. I'm a little bit jealous. Mine are quite dark. But I shall leave it to you two to close this off.
I'm pretty glad that we didn't do this yesterday, because Queensland was letting us down in the weather stakes. It was definitely not looking like summer yesterday. So you picked a good day for it. It's pretty warm out there in our summer.
Nice.
I do not envy our northern colleagues with their pictures of snow. You can keep that.
Absolutely. No, well, we've got the weather. We've got wonderful summer weather. Anyway, look, one of the things that we want you to do is we want to keep the conversation going. So when you go and take one of these sessions, when you go and engage with one of those sessions, if you go and have a look at our Discord server, you can really get into a great conversation with someone else who might have the same issues or might have a different set of issues that you do.
Yeah, so let's just talk about this event format. It's kind of an event that's not an event, because in talking to people, we realized that this sort of social engagement was missing. Online events felt like a bit of just a really long webinar where you were glued to your screen for 3 days solid. And so we decided to mix it up a little bit. With this event, you can come and check out the recordings of all of the different sessions at aka.ms/ITOpsTalks. There you'll see a blog post for each of the sessions with an embedded video and a bunch of links to go and learn more if you're interested in getting access to more resources about the things that are talked about in that session. There will also be the link inside that blog post to each of the individual channels inside our Discord server. So our Discord server, as well as having some general channels, has a separate channel for every individual session. And in there, we've even got our speakers popping in from time to time. So if you're watching in a time zone when the speakers might be asleep, there's a good chance that they'll catch that up when they wake up. And of course, being a global team, the ITOpsTalks people on our team will be popping in and out of that Discord server throughout the course of our 24 hours. We've got a follow the sun team model here for our ITOpsTalk. In the blog post, there is also a link to the feedback form. And so, as we said, this event is a new experiment. We would really like your feedback on how have you found it? Has the format worked for you? Do you like the content? Are there any other topics that you would like to suggest that we can maybe tackle next time? Let us know. This event is only going to get better and better with your feedback.
Thank you very much for all of that, Sonia. And we cannot reiterate enough. Make sure that if you want to see more of this deep dive 300, 400 level content, you've got to provide feedback and go and share this stuff with your friends. Go and shout it from the rooftops. Go and tell everybody about it, because if we really want to demonstrate that there is an audience out there for deep level technical content. And the only way we can prove that is if you're watching it and if you're telling us about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Our speakers have put a lot of time and effort into preparing this content, and we hope it's well received and it's just what you need. Thank you very much for joining us on the live stream today.
Stay empowered.